Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Manabu Sakamoto, and I'll be talking about the evolution of the dinosaurs today. A bit of a summary of the state of the evolution of the dinosaurs, but also showcasing some of my own research in doing so. Okay, so to begin, I'm just going to ask, just to introduce myself. Who am I? My name is Manabu Sakamoto. I just said that already, but I'm an evolutionary biologist, and I'm a senior lecturer in zoology in the School of Life Sciences here at the University of Lincoln. Just kind of a short, brief background, but even though I call myself an evolutionary biologist, I have an MSc and PhD in paleobiology, which I took at the University of Bristol. And I've also got a little bit of industry experience as a data scientist. And at Lincoln, I teach on zoology program, and I teach various zoology modules and paleobiology as well. So what do I do? My main interest in my research is to study how major groups of animals radiated. That means how they increased in the number of species, how they colonized new continents and evolved into these different ecological niches and changed shapes and sizes through time. That's my main interest. And that then also involves how whether environments affect that kind of evolution, how the environments change and affect evolution of shape and size and phenotypes and number of species and stuff like that. And more specifically, one of the focuses I have is to see how natural selection then shapes the evolution of form and function. So these are things like the mechanical functions of the skeleton, how the muscles pull on the bones to move the body. And in particular, what I'm interested in is in how the muscles and the skeletons combine to generate bite forces. So how hard an animal bites, and we can then test whether that is controlled by natural selection relating to dietary ecology. And then in particular, I am very much interested in dinosaurs. That's the thing that I've been passionate about for pretty much my whole life. So that's what I do all this research on. So a question I often get asked is, why dinosaurs? Why do I study dinosaurs? It doesn't really help. I don't know. It doesn't save lives. It doesn't really improve like our life qualities in a way, tangential, in a tangible way. So why dinosaurs? Why do we study dinosaurs? Well, dinosaurs are a really good case study about to understand the evolution of life. They've been around for more than 150 million years during the Mesozoic period, the Mesozoic era. But of course, they're not extinct. So if you include the birds, they've been around for about 250 or 260 million years altogether. So they're a very long-lasting group of animals that's been very, very successful. They dominated the Earth for, the big body ones dominated the Earth for more than 150 million years. And they colonized every continent on the world, including Antarctica. So we have fossils of dinosaurs from everywhere. Even the coldest bits of Antarctica and the coldest bits of the Arctic. Back during the days of the dinosaurs, the Arctic and the Antarctic weren't covered in ice like they are today. They were much warmer, but they still had the long polar winters. So how animals and plants survived such a prolonged period of darkness is an interesting topic of research. But dinosaurs nonetheless were around in the Arctic and in the Antarctic in these weird conditions. And then dinosaurs also span a wide range in body size. I've already mentioned the birds are dinosaurs. So if you think about the smallest hummingbird, like the bee hummingbird, which are in the range of like grams, little, very tiny, very, very light animals, all the way up to these big, huge dinosaurs, like in this red, the sauropods with the long necks, they can go up to like 50 tons, maybe even 100 if you believe some of the research. So that means that there's almost like a 6 orders of magnitude of body size range. It's a huge range in body size. So how an animal group managed to have such a wide range and occupy the ecologies associated with it is very interesting to understand. And that would be kind of that would be a really good case study for understanding the fundamental workings of evolution and ecology. So then I've already mentioned this a little bit, but dinosaurs were very ecologically diverse. So you can see here in this picture, for instance, you have these spiky plated dinosaurs with the big plates on the back, and then you have these bipedal giant carnivorous dinosaurs, and then you have back in the background, you have these really big dinosaurs with these long necks, huge things. They're the biggest things that ever walked on land. And so these are all dinosaurs, and they're all very different things, doing the very different things. These kind of ecologies don't exist now, but nonetheless, they used to fill these niches. And then this is another snapshot of a different ecosystem. And here we see a smaller carnivorous dinosaurs in the foreground, and chasing some tiny bipedal herbivores. And in the background, we have these bigger bipedal or quadrupedal herbivores. They're commonly or colloquially known as the duck-billed dinosaurs, iguanodontians and hadrosaurs. So this is, I think, the Wessex Formation. So this is a snapshot of what Britain would have looked like about 120 million years ago or so in the lower Cretaceous. And so these are other kinds of ecosystems and ecological niches that dinosaurs occupied. And then there's these really weird things that probably ate fish. They have these weird croc-like snouts, and they've been in the news quite a lot because recently somebody's been suggesting that they might have been really good swimmers. Whether or not you believe that is really a bit contentious. A lot of people debate about whether they were actually good swimmers or not, but nonetheless, they actually did really eat fish. That's something that we know from the fossil record, that they actually ate fish. They have a lot of acid-etched fish scales from their gut contents, along with other things like pterosaurs and other dinosaurs as well. So this is an interesting ecological niche that, again, we don't really have something very similar in the modern times now, but these things were what dinosaurs were capable of doing. And let's not forget the birds. Birds are dinosaurs, and you can actually trace the evolution of feathers and wings across the dinosaur tree of life, like this black one on the left here. This black one here is a winged dinosaur with feathers. It's about 1 meter long, so it's kind of big for a bird, I guess, but that includes the tail. So this is probably like a big raven's kind of sized animal, and you can see the artist clearly had like crows or ravens in mind when they painted this. And then the interesting thing is that they have these various kind of flight patterns or flight modes that they were kind of experimenting in a way. So this particular dinosaur called the Microraptor has 4 pairs of wings. So 2 pairs on the 2 arms, and then one pair on the arms and another pair on the legs. So they have this kind of like a biplane mode of flight. And then this fossil here is Archaeopteryx. This is the oldest known definitive dinosaur bird. And then it then gave rise to this massive diversity of birds later on. And in the present time, birds are about like 10,000 species or so. So it's a massively successful group of animals, and dinosaurs, the Mesozoic dinosaurs, are where birds came from. So understanding the evolution of dinosaurs then also gives us a lot of better understanding of how birds were able to radiate and have such massive success. So before we begin getting a bit more into the actual evolution of dinosaurs, I just wanted to lay out what dinosaurs actually are, what defines a dinosaur, what makes a dinosaur. So dinosaurs were first described and named Dinosauria by Richard Owen in 1842. He's a British, he was a British scholar, reverend as well, but he recognized some similarities in fossils that were being discovered back then. So around that time, other people like Gideon Mantell were discovering all these giant bones from way back millions of years ago, and the paleontologists back then thought they were reptiles because they had reptile features. But Richard Owen also noticed that 3 of these giant reptiles, the Iguanodon, Megalosaurus, and Hylaeosaurus, had quite unique things that separated them from other reptiles. So unlike other reptiles, these 3 species of reptiles had mammal-like upright limb postures. So they weren't sprawled out but they had these upright limbs. And the hip structures were quite similar between these three groups, that animals. So, and he united these three things and called them dinosaurs, terrible lizards. And then that's Richard Owen there. And this is an excerpt from the paper where he presented the idea of Dinosauria. And there's some reconstructions of what they thought dinosaurs looked like back then, which is, we know, which is actually not quite true anymore. That dinosaurs don't look like that. So there's some of the features that Richard Owen noticed are still recognized today as being very important for dinosaurs. So one of the things is what's called the fourth trochanter on the femur. The femur is the thigh bone, and that is basically a scar or a ridge where muscle was attached, a really big muscle that was pulling the femur back when it was walking. And it attaches on the femur and it inserts into the tail. So it's a tail-driven, really massive, a very strong muscle that was pulling the legs fore and aft. So it swings like a pendulum, backwards and forwards. And then relating to this upright posture and locomotion style, the hip bone has something called an open acetabulum. So it's like it's an opening where the thigh bone joins the hip bone and it's open. It doesn't have a back. So that's a feature of dinosaurs. Another feature of dinosaurs that are related to locomotion again is what's known as the delta pectoral crest on the humerus. So that's the upper arm bone, and there's a crest here. Again, this is for muscle attachment, a massive muscle that attaches from the arm onto the chest. And that's also used to move the arm, swing the arm forwards and backwards, and that's relating to the locomotion style. So then dinosaurs had these upright leg postures, and their legs and forearm, or their locomotion relates to these kind of forward and backwards movement. They swing their arms and legs along the sagittal plane, the midline of the body. And this is just another one that there's an opening at the top of the skull called the supratemporal fossa, where it's been debated what it's for, but some people think it's like a vacuous cavity where like an air sac was there. Other people think it's part of the jaw muscle attachments, but that's a feature that dinosaurs have. And then this is something that separates dinosaurs from crocodilians. The crocodilians are actually the closest living relatives of birds and dinosaurs. And then back in the Mesozoic era, there were actually a lot of other crocodilian-like archosaur reptiles. So archosaurs are crocodiles and birds. Dinosaurs and crocodilians are also all related, but this group of the reptiles called archosaurs are split in two. One is the dinosaur line, the bird line crocodiles, or the bird line archosaurs, and then you have the crocodile line archosaurs. And now we only have crocodiles and birds, but in the fossil record, we used to have tons and tons of different types of animals that would sit along the stem in the tree of life towards these two groups. And so there's a big distinction between these two groups of archosaurs. And one is that the croc-line ones are called the crurotarsal. So what that means is that the ankle is a rotary joint. So it's got this red line is the joint surface, and that's the ankle bone here. This is the foot part, and that's the shin bone here. And it's highlighted here. That's actually where we're zooming in on. And so, unlike us, the hinge isn't a kind of like, it's not really a hinge joint. It's basically kind of like a rotary joint. So it swings around while it hinges. And this is another crurotarsan hinge joint as well. So the rotary joint and the hinge joint. Whereas in dinosaurs and their closest relatives, this joint is a hinge joint. So it's actually a straight line between the shin bit and the foot. So this ankle bone joint is a straight line. It's a proper hinge rather than its rotary joint. And what that means is that if you've ever seen a picture, a movie or a video of a crocodile walking, when they walk, they actually twist and rotate. And that's not just relating to the shoulder or the legs. It's also relating to how the ankle moves as well. So they twist like this because the ankle joint isn't a hinge. Whereas in dinosaurs, if you look at birds, they actually have a proper hinge joint, so their ankles flip like that. But the problem with these kind of characteristics is that there's actually all these these closely related dinosaur-like animals called the dinosauromorphs, and they're not quite dinosaurs, but they possess a lot of these, or mostly, or if not all of these dinosaur features already. So they have upright limbs, and they have these reduced toes, so the number of toes is the same as dinosaurs, and they have a hinge ankle. So these things, like these, there's some in the slide, Silosaurus, Lagarpodon, Dromaeomeron, and Marsuchus. These are all, they look like dinosaurs, they have dinosaur features, but they're not quite what we'd call dinosaurs. And so we have this problem where how do you extend all these, or how do you include all these into, how do you call them dinosaurs? How do you distinguish these as dinosaurs? Do you include them as dinosaurs, or do you exclude them? So we need a really good definition of what we're going to call dinosaurs and what we're not going to call dinosaurs. I mean, for all intents and purposes, these are pretty much dinosaurian, so you can probably call them dinosaurs, but in science we have to be precise. So modern definition of dinosaurs is not defined by the features themselves, but it's defined by the relationship. So when we say dinosaurs are basically the group of animals that include Triceratops and the house domestic, the house sparrow, Passer domesticus. And then that means that the last common ancestor of these two animals and all of its descendants would be called a dinosaur. So in this diagram, Dinosauria is that little round node, and anything above that and descended from that last common ancestor is a dinosaur. But things like dinosauromorphs and crocodilomorphs aren't dinosaurs because they don't share a common ancestor with these two species of animals. But what that then allows is that if any of these dinosauromorph animals end up being closer in the tree of life to Triceratops or house sparrow, depending on the data you're using, depending on the expert you ask, then that can actually become a dinosaur, and we don't have to redefine dinosaurs based on features, commonalities. This is a flexible way of, yet precise way of defining what a dinosaur is. So let's talk a little bit about what dinosaurs are in more within the dinosaur group. So because we've defined what dinosaurs are, let's go and talk a little bit about the different groups of dinosaurs that are fall within that group. Dinosaurs have traditionally been split into two groups. One is the saurischians, or the lizard-hip dinosaurs, and the other one is the ornithischian, the bird-hip dinosaurs. And the reason they're called lizard hip and bird hip is that the lizard hip ones have a pubis that is forward facing, just like how lizards have their hip shapes are basically lizard-like. Ornithischians have the bird-like hip, so they have this pubis pointing backwards, and it's alongside the ischium. But ironically, birds are actually descended from the saurischian, the lizard hip dinosaurs, and the ornithischian dinosaurs did not give rise to the bird hip. The actual birds, despite them being called bird-hipped, it's just a superficial similarity, that feature that's been acquired independently rather than shared. And within Saurischia, there's two groups of dinosaurs that make up Saurischia. One is the theropods. So these are basically literally means beast feet. So these are the carnivorous dinosaurs and their descendants, including birds. And then there's the sauropodomorphs in the blue, which are the long-necked giant ones. And these two both have the saurischian hip bone structure, so they are usually united into the group Saurischia, and then excluding Ornithischia. So this is the basic kind of classic representation of the dinosaurian basal relationships. But this has kind of been challenged from time to time. And there's actually three competing hypotheses. So if there's three main groups, there's going to be three possible relationships. And actually, all three possible relationships are viable hypotheses. So you got one where theropod and sauropods are closely related in Saurischia. And then another alternative hypothesis is that theropods and ornithischians are more closely related to each other. And that clade then is called the Ornithiscalida. A clade is a group of the animals. And then this last and third is when sauropods are more closely related to ornithischians, and that group is called Phytodinosauria. So there's three groups, so there's three hypotheses of interrelationships. And the reason that we, there's these three hypotheses that are competing with each other in a way, is that if you actually look at the earliest dinosaurs where these divergences would have been happening, all of the dinosaurs that belong in those different groups look very similar. So this, if you just look at a glance, they all just look like these little bipedal animals. And, in time, they're very closely related to each other, very close to the common ancestor. So they haven't had a lot of time to diverge. So they look very similar. So if you just look at them, the relationship is a little bit uncertain. So we have the theropod ancestors, the sauropod ancestors, and the ornithischian ancestors in this red, blue, and green color scheme. But how they relate to each other is a little bit uncertain at this time because they're so similar, you can't really tell them apart very well. So the basal relationship between those is a little bit contentious. It's a bit difficult. And if we actually look at the data that supports all this kind of stuff, so in upper right hand here, this black bit, this is a data file with the species here. So if you have a zoomed in bit here in the blue, this is zoomed in here. These are the species names, and this is basically the data. These are features that have been coded into 01 or 012 schemes. So for instance, something like the presence of a delta pectoral crest, 0 is absence, present is 1. The presence of the fourth trochanter on femur, 0 is absent, present 1. So you do code these for this many different characteristics for each species, and then we run through like a kind of like a similarity analysis. And then what happens is these diamonds here are basically links networks linking these different species based on the similarities you can get from the data. So what this shows is that at the base of the relationship, there's this huge bit where everything is shared a lot. So there's a huge network of things that are very similar to each other. And so this is why this is such a difficult topic and a problem, is because they're very similar. The data actually also reflects their similarities. So the basal relationship is a little bit uncertain because of it. But in reality, there's only really one true tree. And then the best estimate from the data is this three-way relationship, a trichotomy. So it's instead of a divergence, a dichotomy, you have a three-way split. That's the best estimate we can get from the data because of their similarities. But there's only one tree, and there's three hypotheses we have to choose from which one is the real tree. And that's where the debate is right now. That's where a lot of scientists are actually trying to resolve using data analyses. And then depending on the data you use, depending on the methods you use, depending on which species you sample, these all three possibilities actually pop up. But the most well-supported, that for the longest time, and it's still well-supported, and relationship is the classic one where I introduced at the beginning, where you have Saurischians and Ornithischia splitting nicely between the two hip structures, and then with Saurischia including theropods and sauropods, and Ornithischium being on its own. So this is kind of like the consensus tree right now. Most dinosaur researchers will work off of this fundamental relationship as kind of like almost like a basic assumption that this is the relationship that we're going to use. We know it's a bit uncertain, but this is the one that we're kind of happy to stick with for the time being. So then let's just leave that for, well, we can't really do much about it. So we have to then move on to the next topic that I want to talk about is then how did dinosaurs rise to dominance? So this also, again, kind of relies a bit on that relationship, not necessarily the relationship itself, but the timing of when that divergence occurred. So on the left-hand side, this is a tree of life from that analysis I showed earlier, but the timings have been placed. It's been calibrated based on just the fossil occurrences. So if you do that, then all the oldest ones, like I said before, occur pretty much at the same time. So the oldest ancestral dinosaur-like dinosaur morphs, and then the oldest dinosaurs all are appearing at the same time. So that means that if you just look at the fossils at face value, then all these dinosaurs just appeared pretty much overnight in a geological time frame, and they just had this massive radiation. They just like, it's an explosion, right? But there's other ways of dating that split, those splitting events. Like on the right-hand side, I used some data for this, and then basically estimated the divergence dates based on a certain rate of evolution based on morphological features. So how fast something is evolving over time, like clockwork, and we can work back when that divergence might have happened. And if we do that, if you can see the x-axis, it's beyond the 250. It's around 260 million years, whereas if you just look at the fossil, it's about 247 million years. So you can add about 10 to 15 million years on this time frame, and the ancestors are even farther back than that. So that means that we have a little bit more time for these divergences to have occurred. So it's not as much of an explosion as we thought initially. And I think this is happening not just in dinosaurs. You see this a lot, like the Cambrian explosion is a really good example during the Cambrian period, Cambrian era, period, where all these incredible life diversified into what we know now. All the major groups of animals appeared during the Cambrian period, during the Cambrian explosion, but we're actually finding older fossils to indicate that these divergences might have happened earlier. So it might not be an explosion after all. And so the same thing could be said again for birds as well, maybe even mammals. And a lot of these newer findings in the fossil record, better ways of dating these divergences are revealing an older origin for a lot of these groups of animals that we thought might have appeared really like in an explosive manner. So this is a really important bit that needs a bit more work. So this is something that I'm doing right now, and there'll be my focus for ongoing research in the future. So that's an important bit of information we kind of have to keep in mind. But then we can then also go ahead and trace how dinosaurs then radiated. Because dinosaurs, again, like I said before, dominated the Earth and they were on every continent. So how did they do that? So dinosaurs started out in South America, in Argentina specifically. Well, that's where the fossils are. Maybe they might be just that we don't have all the fossils. But for that time being, what we know is that dinosaurs started in South America, in the southern continents, and then through time in the Triassic period. So this is a period between about 250 million years to up to about 200 million years. So in a span about 40 to 50 million years, dinosaurs radiated from South America all the way to the even up to Asia. So they actually have a global distribution within that kind of time frame. And so you see the globe here and the maps. Back in that time period, the world had all the continents were stuck together in a supercontinent called Pangaea. So dinosaurs could basically roam around and migrate from one part of the world to the other on land. So then, if I quickly go back, so these are all the red ones are dinosaurs, the red ones and the green ones are dinosaurs, the red ones are saurischians, and the green ones are ornithischians, and the yellow ones are these basal dinosauromorphs. But here, for all intents and purposes, we're just going to call all these like dinosaurs in a way, because they are very similar to dinosaurs. So if we look at the time period at like the middle one, the Campanian here, where you have a bit of dinosaurs starting to spread. So they've started to become a bit more dominant. The world looked a bit more like this. So this is the Campanian stage of the Triassic period, about 237 to 227 million years ago. At this point, dinosaurs were still rare. So in the ecosystem, the dominant herbivores were something called dicynodonts and rhynchosaurs. Rhynchosaurs are archosaurian reptiles. Dicynodonts are what used to be called mammal-like reptiles. So they're reptiles, but they have features that are similar to mammals, and they're more closely related to mammals than they are to these archosaurian reptiles. So these were the dominant herbivores. They're pretty big animals, like cows size kind of things, or even bigger. And then the dominant carnivores were also archosaurian reptiles called things like phytosaurs and rauisuchians. So these are like more like croc-line archosaurian reptiles. So they're like basically giant crocs that walked around land rather than in the swamps and in the rivers. And then you have these rare dinosaurs, Saturnalia and Staurikosaurus around, but they're not a very major component of the ecosystem yet. So then fast forward to the Norian stage of the Triassic period, 227 million years to 208 million years. then the dominant herbivores are now dinosaurs. So these giant, well, not necessarily giant, but they're bigger. These slightly long-necked sauropodomorphs are the dominant herbivores, but the carnivores are still being dominated by the Rauisuchians and the phytosaurs. So you do have dinosaur carnivores that are suddenly getting bigger, but they're still a small, minor component of the ecosystem. And the carnivores are still dominated by these Archosaurian reptiles. But then in the early Jurassic period, after that, the picture has already changed. Dinosaurs are now the dominant force. There's small carnivores, medium carnivores, and large carnivores. All the different guilds are all dinosaurs, on land at least. So how did this happen? So there's two hypotheses relating to how this happened. One is the competitive replacement hypothesis, which means that the competitors got outcompeted by dinosaurs, and then as the dinosaurs started taking over, the competitors started losing their diversity and dinosaurs took over. So that's one hypothesis. And the other one is the ecological opportunity hypothesis, where the competitors got wiped out by some kind of an event, maybe like an extinction event, a massive, drastic environmental change. And then dinosaurs survived that event, and they took the opportunity and radiated to fill all these empty ecological niches. So for the longest time, the left one, the competitive replacement, was usually the dominant ideas behind evolutionary successes. So people, scientists used to think that dinosaurs were better than these competitors, so they actually outcompeted them. But then mammals came along, and mammals were better than dinosaurs, so dinosaurs got outcompeted, and mammals, took over the world. So that's kind of the traditional classic way of looking at things until the 1980s, when people started to realize that, well, actually, if you actually look at the data, that's not really true. And so this is one of those examples from the 1980s. This is a study of fairly simple. The authors, Mike Benton at Bristol, tallied up the numbers of species that were around in that time period. And so at the bottom, there's the Campanian stage. That's when dinosaurs were still rare. And on the x-axis, these are the different groups of animals. And towards the left is the herbivores, and towards the right are the carnivores. And then there's two mass extinction events here listed at 225 million years, and then again at the end of the Campanian, and then another one at 200 million years at the end of the Norian and the Retian. So that's the end of the Triassic period. So at the end of the Campanian, during the Campanian, the herbivore guild was completely dominated by these other animals. Dicynodonts and other reptiles and dinosaurs were very rare. But at the end of the Campanian period, these animals got wiped out. They went extinct. And then the herbivorous dinosaurs then took over, massively radiated and filled all these empty ecological niches. But then the carnivores were still dominated by these other archosaurs and reptiles. So theropod dinosaurs, the carnivorous dinosaurs, were kind of doing a little bit better, but for the most part, they weren't really the dominant force until the end of the extinction, at the end of the Triassic period, when these Archosaurian reptiles went extinct, got wiped out, and then theropod dinosaurs then took the opportunity and then radiated into these bigger-bodied carnivore guilds. So there's this two-phase expansion, which can be explained by the ecological opportunity, the following catastrophe model of expansion. So then dinosaurs then went on to diversify throughout the rest of their history, and diversified into various different ecological roles, the different sizes, body sizes, and colonized the whole globe. And so this is where how in the Triassic period, this is the range of dinosaurs range during the Triassic period is in the green, and then the Jurassic is in the lighter purple or pink kind of color, and then the Cretaceous period is in the purple. So we can see through time they steadily and rapidly diversified and dispersed across the globe. So then dinosaurs ruled the Earth for over 150 million years. Like we said earlier, they spanned massive range of body sizes and filled most ecological niches you can think about, including flying. They didn't go into the ocean as much. So there's no dinosaur whales, but there were animals that kind of was on the way, like the Spinosaurs. And then they were, so they had their heyday. They were really massively successful and dominant for over 100 million years, 150 million years. But then they went extinct all of a sudden. So this brings us to the next topic that I want to cover. How did dinosaurs go extinct? The short answer is that big rock from space killed them. There's no debate about that anymore. That's irrefutable fact that an asteroid impact killed the dinosaurs off. But more specifically, what we're talking about here is were the dinosaurs at their height of their reign when the asteroid impact happened, so asteroid hit. So were dinosaurs doing really well? They were still at the reign of their dominance. Were they still dominant? Were they going strong? And it was just unlucky that the asteroid hit and they went extinct. Or were they already going extinct? Like, were they dwindling in numbers? Was the environment changing too much? And were dinosaurs actually kind of not really doing that well and the asteroid impact killed them off? So these are kind of two different ways of looking at things. But fundamentally what that translates to in terms of actual research question is then what we're actually asking then is how many species of dinosaurs were there, basically. Not just at the end of the Cretaceous period when the dinosaurs went extinct, but leading up to it. So there's three kind of, there's three competing alternate hypotheses to test about this. First one is, did dinosaurs continuously increase species count through time? So this is basically they don't stop. They're just proliferating, they're speciating, they're diversifying through time in a way nonstop. The second one, B, here, model B, is following an initial rapid expansion as we see from the fossil record and the global distribution, the dinosaurs then kind of reach like this constant number of dinosaur species through time. So that means that the number of new species appearing and the number of species going extinct is basically at equilibrium. So when a new species appears, another one is basically kind of displaced and goes extinct. And so this is where you have a steady number of dinosaurs through time. And this is also a kind of model where it's at a stable ecological state. Ecological equilibrium is what it's normally called. So this model B also supports the idea that dinosaurs were doing really well before the mass extinction. Then model C, the third one, is then similar to B. There's an initial rapid rate of expansion, and it slows down in the rate of diversification, but then it starts to decline. So more species are going extinct than new ones were being added. So which one is it? What does the fossil evidence support? What are the the data that we get from that support? So if we just took the fossil record at face value and we just counted the number of species, what we find is a curve like this. So on the y-axis, we have the number of species, and on the x, there's time. So from the left to the right is older to the younger. And there's three curves here for the three different groups of dinosaurs. But I've put this orange line through it to kind of show. But in the long term, dinosaur species counts shows an exponential increase through time. So there's fluctuation here and there, dips and peaks and troughs and stuff. But overall, the younger the age of the rock, the more species of dinosaurs you find. And generally speaking. So that's the exponential increase model A being supported there. But if you're interested at the end of the Cretaceous where dinosaurs were going extinct or not, if the extinction happened suddenly, in the last 10 million years, there's actually a dip in number of dinosaurs with that blue arrow pointing down. But also the box plot next to it shows the kind of the distribution of the data. So the number of dinosaurs species are not, it's significantly less in the last stage, the Maastrichtian stage, compared to the second to the last stage, the Campanian stage. So these two are conflicting, but so people have used the raw numbers of species to support both of these arguments. That dinosaurs were doing really well, they were expanding, increasing in numbers. But also then others would argue that the numbers of dinosaurs would indicate that they were going in decline, that they were actually already going extinct. But if we compare this to the amount of available rock through time, so this is basically how many rocks there are of each time period and how much species of dinosaurs you can find because there's rock. If you do that, so on the top is the species count chart I showed in the previous slide, and the bottom is the rock availability through time. And they basically track very well. And these are two curves showed side by side, and we usually call these wriggle matching. But even if you did much of statistical analysis on these, there's a good correlation between the amount of species, number of species, and the amount of rock being available. So what this means is that these patterns that we see from the fossil record, the exponential increase, or even the dip in the diversity at the last 10 million years, it's basically reflecting unevenness in fossil preservation and sampling rather than a real diversity signal. So we gotta take that into account when we're talking about this. So so just a quick talk about sampling issues. So basically, if you're on the left, this is where you can actually have a good random sample, and you just sample randomly from a population on the left, and then the sample would reflect the underlying structure of the population because you've randomly sampled it. But what if that population actually is somehow, there's missing data? You can't sample a certain part of that population for whatever reason. Then the sample you have is actually skewed. You don't really get a full picture, and it's biased. So this is a bias owing to non-random sampling because you couldn't randomly sample. And the fossil record is very much like this. So some time periods, some geographical regions, you just don't have the rocks, or the conditions were great, so fossilization didn't occur. Other forms of sampling bias comes from, for instance, maybe paleontology isn't a very well funded area in that subject in that country, for instance. Or maybe there's some political turmoil and you just can't go to the field and dig. So there's all these different kinds of human elements as well, and that comes into sampling bias. But nonetheless, if you actually correct for these sampling biases, then what happens is you get these charts, these curves that are more stable through time rather than showing any long-term trends. So you don't see a large-scale increase, and you don't really see a dip at the end of the Cretaceous period, for instance. Like on the right, there was a dip here, but if you adjust for sampling, then there is no dip anymore. Other forms of data as well, the morphological diversity, so also shows consistent amount of high disparity. So this basically, through the time, this now is because we're looking at it as a geological log. So the older rocks are at the bottom, and then the younger ones are towards the top. So you imagine like these sediments are depositing, so it's actually stacking up on top of each other. So if you look at time now on the vertical axis, and each slice shows the diversity of morphological features. So these are tooth shape variation, but then the amount of variation that each time slice has is very similar to each other. And if you plot them statistically along through time, again, there's no real change. So dinosaurs weren't really disappearing from these ecological niches that they were occupying. And it's quite likely that they maintain their high morphological diversity all the way up to the end of the Cretaceous. And then even if the numbers of dinosaurs that you're finding were dipping towards the end, suitable habitats, if you reconstruct the habitats, would also indicate that dinosaurs may have been around, or at least the habitat was available for dinosaurs to be around. And so then the argument here is that if you're not really finding dinosaurs, that's probably only to do with the fact that you're just not finding fossils, rather than that dinosaurs have disappeared. So in a way, this is kind of like absence of evidence isn't an evidence of absence. So we have to assume that they were just not there because we don't have the sample. So this is kind of, again, evidence to support the idea that dinosaurs were probably doing very well all the way up to the end of the Cretaceous, and they were just unlucky. So there's a problem with this approach, though, is that species counts are actually kind of redundant. So they're counting up a lot of things that you probably shouldn't be counting multiple times, in a way. In a nutshell, that's what's happening. And more precisely, what I'm talking about here is that species, the changes in the species count, so whether a new species appears or a species goes extinct, are not really equivalent across the tree of life. So what I mean by this is that if you compare these two groups that I've highlighted, the one in blue and the one in green, for instance, and let's say these are comparable groups just because of the time frame is very similar. For instance, they had about the same kind of time for them to evolve. But in the blue one, an increase in 5 species indicated that orange one is a big deal. Because for most of their history, there's only been 2 species. But all of a sudden at that end, there's a huge increase, 5 species increase. So it's from 2 to 6 all of a sudden, right? Well, actually, one goes extinct, so it's 5. It used to be 2, but it's 5 now. Conversely, in the green one, because it has so many species already, an increase in 5 is actually pretty much nothing. It doesn't really add much to that group, but it's within expectation because the more species you have, just by chance, the more speciation, the new species appearance would occur. It's just a matter of like a probability of things happening. And so if you have a very speciose part of the tree and you start seeing, let's say you started off with like 10 new species appearing every 1 million years, and then through time, that actually started gradually declining to become maybe only 5 new species were appearing, and then only 1 new species was appearing every 1 million years. But if you were just counting it, that group might actually have like 100 species already. So if you were counting it, that subtle change won't really manifest as really big dips in the counts. But actually, fundamentally, what's happening is that it's actually declining in the rate of new species appearing. And in a way, if it actually then gets taken over or overtaken by the amount of the species going extinct, ultimately that group is going to go extinct. But you won't really be able to see those things in such nuanced things if you're just looking at the count of species, especially if you have a huge number of species to begin with. So what we're interested in is in the changes in the number of species through time and at the rate at which those changes occur. That's what important, rather than the actual standing count, because counts can be misleading. And then because, so what that then is, we can reframe that question to then talk about rather than saying is the number of species consistent or is the number of species maintained high, we can then say, does the probability of speciation change through time? So that means like whether the probability of observing a new species appearing and in more than the number of species going extinct, for instance, does that change through time? Because that's kind of more fundamentally what's driving diversity, rather than the diversity itself. It's the underlying forces driving diversity that's important. So if you count up the number of speciation events, so these are splits on the tree, and then we have to weight them though, because like I said before, this very speciose part of the tree is going to have more speciation events. So if you just counted up the number of species there, it's going to be biased again. Well, it's not really showing an underlying actual process because it's just by sheer number of species already there, you're going to find speciation events. So we can weight them accordingly to the structure of the phylogeny, the structure of the tree of life, number of lineages that were there already, and the accrued history of speciation that's happened before. And then so if we weight it according to these, and we can then model it as a function of time. So that's what we did a few years ago, me and my colleagues. And then what we found was, if we looked at it that way, the diversification, so basically the net change in species after accounting for extinctions, I guess, in a way, that overall, for the, generally speaking, broadly speaking, dinosaurs were actually in decline in terms of new species being added to what's there. So after, there's a rapid initial rate of diversification, so shown here on a scale from gold to black. So gold means high rates. So that's a lot of speciation events happening in a short period of time, or per unit time. And then because this initial rate of diversification then gradually slows down and then is then kind of overtaken by extinction in a way. So it goes into the negative range. In these 3 big groups, the ornithischians, theropods, and sauropods, generally speaking. But there are some exceptions within those groups. So within the ornithischians, these 2 groups highlighted the hadrosauriforms, so which are the duck-billed dinosaurs, and the ceratopsians, which are the horned dinosaurs, seem to have an inverse kind of response in that way, that they're actually still in their, they're actually have like this renewed exponential increase phase. But they are a relatively young group of dinosaurs, so there's kind of almost like they appeared and they're still in their initial rapid expansion phase. But overall, generally speaking, dinosaurs seem to have gone through a decline in the diversification rate. So new species, that's again, the new species of dinosaurs being added is slowing down. And this, in a way, this tracks very well with their geographical distribution, or the history of the geographical dispersal. So dinosaurs had an initial massive radiation or dispersal across the globe during the Jurassic period, when there was just one supercontinent, Pangaea. So it could just go from one place to another, fairly easily, because it was just a big landmass. But as the continents started to split up and the areas became more constrained, they're still continents, but they're fragmented. And then their rate of dispersal basically slows down. So they can't really move as much as they used to before. And they basically don't really move as much towards the end of the Cretaceous period. You have these endemic communities that are just evolving there rather than moving around too much. So that's what we see. So basically, this is pretty much what we're seeing is like geographical signatures of diversification. So I've just kind of said this already, but the fragmented continents means there's smaller individual geographical regions for dinosaurs to explore and expand out to. And then smaller areas basically means less space. So then that basically shows a negative impact on the diversification. So then, because we're not really talking about the actual numbers of species through time, but we're talking about changes in the species, speciation rate, the new species being added through time. So what does this mean ecologically? We have to kind of wrap our heads around this. So let's give a bit of an example of towards the end of the Cretaceous, of the late Cretaceous, during the Campanian stage. So this is the second to the last one, where we're supposed to, they're supposed to have higher numbers of species, dinosaurs. So let's look at what the communities look like. So here, these are two communities of dinosaurs at that stage. So we see a bunch of these duck-billed dinosaurs. These ones like these are duck-billed dinosaurs. And we have the tyrannosaur here, and we have these horned dinosaurs, an armored dinosaur, an ostrich-like dinosaur. And then here too, we have a bunch of hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, lots of horned dinosaurs, a large tyrannosaur, and an ankylosaur. So this is then later in in history. So this is the late Cretaceous, the Maastrichtian stage. So this is supposed to be where the numbers of dinosaurs are lower than the Campanian. But let's look at then the diversity again. So we have a large tyrannosaur. We have a large sauropod here in this case, a duck-billed dinosaur, horned dinosaur, an ankylosaur, which is an armored dinosaur, and a bunch of smaller dinosaurs. And then here too, we have, this is the Hell Creek Formation in North America. This is Tyrannosaurus rex itself, Triceratops as well. So we got a large tyrannosaur, some horned dinosaurs, an ankylosaur, an armored dinosaur, and a hadrosaur, and a bunch of smaller dinosaurs. So what you notice is that even if the numbers of species might be less, the diversity might be low, but the composition is pretty much the same. You have the same things doing the same things. And so what this signifies, this is my interpretation, and I'm not sure if all the paleontologists out there would agree with me, but what I think is that dinosaurs were losing ecological resilience. So what that means is that you have less diversity, but they're very abundant. So they're still like ecologically strong in a way. They're maintaining this ecological stability. They're at their heyday in some ways, but they're only similar species that are replacing all these extinct species. So they're different species, but they're same things in a way. So it's a consistent community structure through time, which was enabled by a prolonged environmental stability. But that also means that they were losing the ecological resilience because they're relying on this environmental stability. So when something happens, like an asteroid hits, then they can't really cope with it. And then so I just wanted to wrap up before I actually finish. I just wanted to mention that my focus now is not at the end of the dinosaurs, but towards the beginning of dinosaurs, because in order for us to actually understand whether dinosaurs were actually in decline or whether they were strong, the initial rate of that expansion is actually really, really important. But that really depends on how we can date that divergence, the original divergence of the dinosaurs. So this is some work that I'm really trying to focus on now to try to get to the bottom of how they started, because the beginning is important to understand the end. So I just have a bit of conclusions. I don't think I need to go through this anymore, because if you sat through this, you probably would have got this already. So I just wanted to say thank you. And if there's any questions, I'm just gonna quickly check if there's any questions. Feel free to comment on if you have any questions. But if not, then thank you very much for attending and listening to my talk.